So we obviously had the big news this week about the Man City APT case. Both parties, Man City and the Premier League, have claimed wins in that case. How have you viewed it?
So I think it's probably fair for both sides to claim some level of success. I think it is a narrow win for City, probably just. My main reason for that is it's undeniable that City came out with a better position than they went into the hearing with in relation to two big issues, and it may not be the ones that people think. I don't see the shareholder loan situation being a particularly important change. I think we might talk about some of the clubs affected a little bit later, but my view is that it can be easily fixed for most clubs. I do think it's an issue in terms of what has historically been the calculations that have been put through in relation to PSR, but I don't think it's going to affect those going forward. So I don't think it's going to be retrospective. So putting that to one side, the other two big wins that City had, one was in relation to a matter that they always warned the Premier League teams about, which were the new rules that came in February of this year. And those rules had only a few tweaks in terms of the drafting, but it was found in the hearing that the drafting changes were material in terms of moving the likelihood of false appraisals by the Premier League and false rejections of commercial deals, moving those in the wrong direction, and effectively they were unwound as being unlawful. So City in October, when these were first proposed by the Premier League, did say to people around the table, we're not sure these are lawful, and if you do proceed, not only will we vote against them, but we reserve our rights to challenge them legally. And the Premier League carried on and the clubs carried on, and City did launch the legal challenge that we see now. What's also interesting, of course, is that even with that legal challenge being made by City in advance of the vote, it only just got through on the vote, and it only got through on the vote because of two teams abstaining, not because they voted for it. Only 11 teams actually voted for those changes that are now found to be unlawful. So in summary, I think those are big win. That particular element is a big win for City, because those rules went too far. The tribunal agreed with them, and they will have to be deleted because they're unlawful. And the second big win for City was the setting aside of the decision to reject City's very valuable and complex sponsorship transaction with Etihad. So Etihad are seeking to renew the long-term deal that they have with City. The Premier League in April rejected it in its full terms. It's interesting and important to note that they would have accepted City's Etihad sponsorship, just not at the very highest level. So they wanted to trim the size of the Etihad transaction, and that was largely because of the growth rate that was put on it in terms of future years. So City have successfully got that decision unwound, and they will now have another round of being able to make submissions that they would hope will get the approval that they've been seeking. So those are the two significant wins for City, I think, that give them enough to say that they've won. There's a whole list of things that the Premier League can say that they've won, and most fundamentally, an endorsement of sorts by the tribunal that it is acceptable for the Premier League to put in place associated party rules of some sort, and largely along the lines of the 2021 original associated party rules. So, as I say, wins for both sides. I think City probably slightly happier because they've come out with a better position than they went in with.
In In terms of damages for Man City, what kind of level could we be looking at in terms of money for that? What could it be?
Yeah.
In?
Well, there's quite a few hurdles to jump to get to that point. I suspect City will not get material damages, probably. I think if you look at it, the likelihood is that some form of deal will be done on fair that the Premier League accepts as fair market value. It really is just a bit of a negotiation around what the size of it is. So it looks like the total difference over the full period of the proposed deal with Etihad looks like it's less than £100 million over the entire deal. The difference between what's been approved and what City want. So if we think that that's going to be cut a little bit, and then the question will be whether the rules that have been found unlawful, and those don't actually relate to the 2024 amendments, because City have only put these applications in under the original scheme, the 2021 rules. So City's only attempt will be to say that had the rules around the disclosure of additional information, the benchmarking analysis that Nielsen gave, and the timing being different, then City would have got the full amount of the Etihad contract. So I know this is complicated, and it's complicated particularly if this is the first thing people have heard about the judgment. But to really explain it fully, we'd have to go into the, we have to do an hour podcast on what the decision said. But so I'm going to assume a base level of understanding of what was decided. But in essence, City have got to prove that the things that were unlawful were the things that caused the loss, the difference between what they could have got had it all been done in a lawful way in terms of processing by the Premier League, and what actually was carried out. Anyway, top and bottom of it is I suspect that it's going to be very hard for City to prove that those things caused the loss. And in any event, not so sure there's that big a loss. So we'll have to see. As I say, the chances are there won't be a huge compensation claim, I would suspect.
There's been a lot of talk about this blue cartel developing and the red cartel as well. But in terms of the likes of Everton, Chelsea and Newcastle have been brought into that as well. They've backed Man City in this case. Why would they take that stance?
Well, there's two parts to it. The first one is we don't. They back City because they have relevant evidence as much as anything, and are involved, and presumably it serves their purpose. And that's really because these are the teams that have been through the associated transaction process. So we don't know about all the transactions that have been approved by the Premier League. We learned in the decision that as of the time that the witness statement was given, probably in May, the Premier League said that they'd processed 52 associated party transactions. So we know, obviously, of some of the big ones like Newcastle and Seller, the Chelsea hotel deal. We know about that one. We know about Chelsea and Infinite Athlete. But there's lots we don't know about. And of those 52, most of them were processed and presumably approved quite quickly, within 25 days, I think it said. And then there was 11 that took significantly longer than that time period. And presumably those are the ones that were rejected. Bottom line is the ones that were rejected, I think, probably belonged to Everton, Chelsea and Newcastle, such that they were the teams that stood up in front of the panel and described their experiences and therefore supported City. And those are the teams you would also think are going to be mindful going forward of having rules as lax as possible around associated parties. Because if Chelsea's experience is lots of their companies within their wider group have been captured by the associated party rules, and therefore they need to get them approved by the Premier League, then clearly they're going to be focused on that going forward as well as historically. Newcastle is obvious. I mean, we all know that PIF is presumably very focused on having a relaxation of the APT rules. And Everton's an interesting one in that they probably were focused on it historically because of people like Usmanov. That was then blocked because of the Ukraine war, but going forward, they're now interested in it, presumably on the basis of their new buyers, Friedkin or whoever else ends up buying Everton, because they would want those rules to be as open as possible, such that they can fund the club without worries around PSR as quickly as possible. And we know they will have issues around PSR or the replacement regime for some time. So I think, the key focus really is self-interest for these teams that are in these blocks. And you shouldn't, I don't think it's wrong necessarily that they would have self-interest in mind. They can't act as a cartel in the legal terms because that would be legal. But they can act with a common interest that's just a natural common interest, i.e. they look at the world and they have a different world view about how the Premier League should be funded. And that's what they're doing. So I don't think it's a surprise. I think we'll see the Premier League split more and more. I think probably there are other teams who are also on City's side, for want of a better word, in respect of associated parties, and would probably like the rules to be moderate rather than extreme. I can think of Aston Villa, who probably are also in that boat, probably. So we'll see. I think it's going to make the votes quite tight on a lot of these issues, I suspect, going forward when they do put them to a vote within the Premier League. We've already got very, very significant splits around the table. The one I told you about already, in terms of when these rules came in 2024. 11 teams voted for. That was all it took to get it through. And because 2 teams abstained, that was enough to get it through on the majority that it needed, which is the 2/3 majority. And, 11 teams voting through a change of such proportion is clearly a problem for the Premier League. And we need to get back to the days where most things are voted through with almost unanimous approval. But that's going to take some leadership, I think, from in terms of the governance of the Premier League and the leadership of the chief executive and the rest of his team.
So on the other side, in the so-called red cartel, there's the likes of Arsenal, Liverpool, Man United. But what impact could this case have on them in terms of maybe the interest-free shareholder loans and that kind of thing?
Well, it's not an issue for United that they don't have interest-free loans, and that's largely because they have a very split shareholder base, and therefore, if one of the shareholders was providing the company with a loan that was under market value, they would effectively be subsidizing the rest of the shareholders, and clearly they don't want to do that. So the people that tend to have very big shareholder loans are those with near 100% ownership of the club, because then they're not worried about whether they're subsidizing the other shareholders effectively by putting their hands in their pocket, not charging interest, and allowing the other shareholders to gain value of their equity, their shares, on the other side. So the teams that that we should look at as being the important ones are Brighton and Arsenal in particular. But both of those have got near 100% ownership of the clubs that they're loaning to. And so really, they're not really subsidizing anybody in circumstances where they're perfectly able to switch that debt into shares, equity. And so what they would do is the clubs would just issue more shares. It wouldn't be dilutive because they already have 100% of these clubs, and those shares and the proceeds of those shares would repay the loans to the shareholders. So they would effectively remove they would effectively remove the loans and remove, therefore, the issue in terms of the undervalue on the interest rates. So, to be honest with you, I don't think it's a big deal. And furthermore, these clubs have always had to apply a market rate of interest for UEFA purposes. So in the UEFA rules, they've always needed to fair market value low interest or non-interest bearing loans. So overall, even for Arsenal, who have got a £200 million plus shareholder loan, I don't see it's going to be a particular issue for them, although it may be a bit of an irritation. And also, it has to be said, it clearly would change the way that they structure their investment in the club. Otherwise, they would have done it as an equity investment in the first place. So clearly, they wanted to do it as debt rather than as equity, and this will force them probably to go down the route of doing it as equity. And so, I guess you could say that's an irritation for them, because they must have had a rationale for wanting to do it the way that they've done it.